lunar orbiter images were really the first time in all of human history that we saw the moon up close. When President Kennedy on May 25th of 1961 said, "Hey, let's go to the moon," nobody knew what the moon looked like up close. The lunar orbiter images represent mankind's first look up close of the moon in all of human history. Think of the thousands of years that people looked up in the sky at the moon, but only with the lunar orbiter did we actually be able to see what the moon is actually like up close. So if for that reason alone, it's historically important, but also it's for the science, for the preservation of science. We call ourselves, and you'll see our patches, it has a pirate flag. There is a multi-reasons for that, and it's partially an initially unauthorized NASA project, but we call ourselves techno-archaeologists, and we actually created that word. It's literally the archaeology of technology. And in our human history, museums, such as the new museum in Los Gatos and museums all over the world, it is their mission to preserve our common human history.
I was driving in my car on a pretty long trip, and I was listening to NPR, and a story came on about digital dark age. And as a sub-story in this same program, they did a feature on the Lunar Orbiter Image Project and Dennis Wingo. It really spoke to me as a curator because I felt that it represents this interesting story of modern history combined with the quirkiness of working in a McDonald's building, but also the real importance in saving our history, not just space history, but history in general, and especially in this time where it's very dangerous given the advanced technology and the rapid pace of information. It's much harder for historians to even preserve history, let alone for the future historians to interpret it, to get a better idea of what our culture was like in our society.
In the world of science, provenance of data is everything. And the original lunar orbiter images on the tapes that you see behind me represent the original closest to pristine data source for a lunar orbiter, and it had been lost for decades. There were some already in existence. The U.S. Geological Survey had film versions, but I knew that what was on the film had much higher dynamic range, and thus I felt it would be much more appropriate for it to become the base layer for an eventual multi-layer, multi-decade scientific database. And so some folks at NASA headquarters agreed and gave us some money, and off to the races. There's multiple facets to what we're doing. One is the archiving of the data. This is what our students are doing right now. This is what Casey and Susan and all of our students are doing, is the final work to get these into the NASA. It's called the Planetary Data System, to where the archive will be available free to scientists all over the world in its most pristine scientific form. We also are working to produce images that are more, let's say, artistically pleasing to the eye, though not perfectly scientific. And then there is the educational aspect of having the students do original science work and engineering work associated with the project. So that's kind of the mix, or they call it the salad bowl of the reasons that we're doing this. In 2008, we made an arrangement with the NASA Center Director, Pete Worden, to bring images that have been stored in archive for decades up here to NASA Ames. And NASA Ames, the area here is Moffett Field, which is a spun down Navy base. And we were looking for a place to set up shop. And one of our students, Casey Harper's mom, said, "Well, you know, you guys are going to be soldering, so why don't you set up in the McDonald's where the fryers are? That'll suck all the smoke out." We're going, okay. And the air conditioner was working, so we're going, those are two things in our favor. So we set up shop here, which began the adventure.
I started this project when I was 12 because my mom didn't want me and my brothers to be sitting around all summer playing video games and doing basically nothing. We were fine with it, but Dennis needed help. He had just gotten all the tapes. He was starting to get all the pieces for the tape drives themselves, and he needed help. And so we helped clean all of those tapes and tape drives and everything. So to see these machines, these old machines kind of, that obviously hadn't been used in 20, 30 years, be rebuilt and cleaned and turn into these working, running machines that was running these tapes that hadn't been seen for years, was possibly one of the more interesting and fascinating things of it. So.
The advantage of being in a fast food restaurant has been enormous, but completely unexpected. McDonald's is an iconic American thing, and for years people would come here still trying to get food, but journalists, news organizations, documentaries, everybody wanted, oh, you're in a abandoned McDonald's? Oh my goodness. And so it has this cultural connection that nobody had any clue of when we started the project, but has been incredibly beneficial in enabling us to do what we want to do, not only physically with the facility, but also in being able to get the message out about what we're doing in recovering these images.
In the spiel that Dennis gives when giving tours, he goes, this is the only McDonald's where you can come behind the counter. And I think that vibe kind of permeates the whole thing. It's like you get these people who come in from everywhere, from colleges, from internships. You get people who have written novels who've come in here. You get different celebrities who come in here. And they're all, drawn by this very, base, I think, instinct about people, which is this curiosity. And for a long time, the space community has been something that's seeable but not very touchable by a lot of people. And I always view it as kind of a tragedy that a lot of people don't feel like they can be a part of space. And so for McMoon to kind of bridge that gap, I think that people can come in here and go behind the counter, as it were, of the space industry and see these old things that used to be classified and were such an important part of history. It's something that really catches people and can encourage future interest and support.
Engineers of the Boeing Company and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration are making final preparations to launch one of a series of lunar orbiters. The satellite's primary mission is to photograph landing areas on the moon for America's astronauts. An Atlas Agena booster will launch the orbiter from Cape Kennedy. When orbital speed and altitude are achieved, the Atlas booster and nose shroud will separate, and the Agena will fire to place itself and the lunar orbiter into a 100-mile-high orbit around the Earth. They must travel to the exact point in space from which Agena can put the lunar orbiter on its path to the moon. When this point is reached, Agena fires again. Soon after burnout, Agena separates, and the 850-pound orbiter will be on its way. Now speeding through space at 25,000 miles per hour, the vehicle will extend its two-way Earth communication antennas. And solar panels will open to capture and convert the sun's energy into electrical power for orbiter's systems. Tiny attitude control jets located on the corners of the heat shield will be fired to position the vehicle to aim its solar panels toward the sun, and aim its tracker for a fix on its navigational star, Canopus. After 15 hours of flight toward the moon, lunar orbiter will fire its velocity control rocket to make a mid-course correction. Later in the journey, as the orbiter gets closer to the moon, the velocity control rocket will be fired again to slow the spacecraft. This will serve to trap the spacecraft in an off-center orbit around the moon, where it will circle from 4 to 6 days. By tracking this orbit, scientists on Earth will obtain their first precise information about the effects of the moon's gravitational field on the spacecraft. With this knowledge, they will be able to lower the vehicle's orbit to a close 28 miles for photography of the moon's surface. Control of the spacecraft is accomplished through instructions stored in an onboard computer. Mission control personnel can radio new instructions for storage or can bypass the computer to control the orbiter directly. Operating on these instructions, the lunar orbiter will turn itself to aim its two camera lenses downward during picture-taking orbits. Then, as it soars over the desired areas, it will take a series of pictures. One lens will cover an area of 25 square miles and record objects as small as a card table. The other will make overlapping photographs of 440 square mile sections. During its mission, the lunar orbiter will take 160 pairs of pictures while filming 12,000 square miles, an area as large as the combined area of Massachusetts and Connecticut. While photography is in progress, the camera will begin to automatically develop and store the exposed film. Following each series of exposures, the orbiter will again aim its solar panels at the sun. When picture transmission takes place, the stored images will be sent in the form of an electronic signal produced by a light scanning the stored negatives. At Goldstone, near an abandoned gold mine in California's Mojave Desert, this 85-foot diameter antenna is the communication link with the lunar orbiter. It's similar to two other antennas in Australia and Spain, surrounding hills protected from random radio signals. The antenna control team tracks the orbiter with signals the orbiter sends back to Earth. The team also directs the flow of signals from the antenna to the orbiter. This equipment generates signals to the spacecraft. The orbiter's computer responds to the signals and controls the orbiter accordingly. These men are the last human link between Earth and the spacecraft. Incoming photographic information from the orbiter is fed into this equipment where electronic wizardry converts the electronic signal to a pinpoint of light of varying intensity. The tiny beam sweeps back and forth, exposing a moving strip of 35-millimeter film. When processed, the resulting negative shows what the orbiter's camera saw. At the receiving station, technicians will process and study samples of the exposed negative to ensure that signals are coming back properly and that the orbiter's camera is correctly set. Most of the 18 miles of film will be sent to a reassembly facility where the strips will be developed and arranged into large negatives. Prints of these negatives will form the basis for lunar maps. Although direct communication with the lunar orbiter is via Goldstone, or Australia, or Spain, the mission is directed from the Spaceflight Operations Facility in Pasadena. Sitting side by side, NASA and Boeing engineers evaluate and act upon information received from the antennas. The information comes to the Pasadena Computer Center and is translated into a form understandable to engineers. They use it to determine the lunar orbiter's velocity, attitude, temperature, power situation, and some 50 other conditions. This automatic drawing machine charts the data. Other engineers keep track of the orbiter's location and direction. They plot course changes and calculate when and how the spacecraft should be maneuvered. This control room is the nerve center of the entire mission. The operations director and his assistant are in voice contact with key personnel at those installations throughout the world which gather and record flight information. Engineers here at Pasadena interpret the information, and the operations directors use the results to make final flight decisions. When its photographic mission has been completed in about a month, the lunar orbiter will continue to circle the moon, providing information about micrometeoroids and radiation in the moon's vicinity. This data, along with the photographs, is vital to landing men on the moon.